Would you ever move to New York City?
The People's Republic of Mamdanistan in a heartbeat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Revolutions of Our Time, the podcast where we look at protests, revolutions, social movements, and see if we can tease out anything useful for fighting the good fight. My name's Adam, and with me, as always, is a man who is about as far away as you can be within the continental United States from the People's Republic of Mamdanistan. Sam, how are you doing today?
It's true, yet I felt the hope radiate from that beautiful city in the past few weeks, and I'm doing well because it's not often we get to feel hope from where we stand politically.
That's very true, and we're going to go right into talking about Zohran Mamdani.
Wait, hold on. It's rare I get to say this, but it's raining today in San Diego.
Wow. It's you bringing up the weather, and it's bringing up rain. It is also raining in Bristol, and horrifically so. But I'm very happy for you.
Yeah. I just had to bring that up because it felt mandatory.
Big fan. I'm very happy for the plants in Southern California, and indeed the people there as well. We're going to get going right away talking about Mamdani. I do have an Independence Day to celebrate, but we'll save that for the end.
You know, I think if we had reached out about a year ago, we could have got Mamdani on the podcast.
Maybe so, but he's got bigger fish to fry right now. So Zohran Mamdani is the mayor-elect of New York City. He is young for American politicians. He's 34 years old. He is a first-generation immigrant. He was born in Kampala, Uganda, to parents of Indian descent. He's a democratic socialist, a progressive, and is known for, as you say, Sam, bringing a sort of sense of hope and maybe joy to American politics where that has felt pretty barren for a number of years. We're going to be talking a little bit about Mamdani, his life before his mayoral campaign, a bit about the mayoral campaign itself. I'm going to cut in the portion of a previous episode where we talked about this before he won the election, where we've got some analysis there. So there'll be a bit of splicing about. But I want to start out by talking about Mamdani, the man, where he came from, what impact this might have had on his popularity. So Zohran Kwame Mamdani was born in Kampala, Uganda in 1991. He is the son of Mahmoud Mamdani, who is a post-colonial academic, and Mira Nair, a filmmaker. His middle name, Kwame, is his namesake is Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first president of an independent Ghana. Now, the role of Indians in Uganda is pretty interesting and something that we could do a whole podcast about, or we could do a whole podcast series about. I wonder if this is something that you're familiar with at all, Sam.
My historical knowledge of colonial African history is admittedly quite shallow compared to my studies, which was more East Asia. But I know that, as we've kind of discussed before, that the British used minority groups to control other minority groups within the empire, and they did use a lot of different groups from the subcontinent of India, particularly the Sikhs, throughout Africa, throughout Asia, to be their like police force. And I'm assuming they used sort of other ethnic group. Well, actually, I do know that the British utilized the caste system to identify potential allies within India, to be like scribes, they basically turned the Brahmin scribes into British officials, and I'm assuming they sent those around the empire as well to help them out.
Yeah, so I'm not sure of the specific caste makeup of Indians who the British brought to Uganda and across Africa. But in Uganda, Indians were brought over by the British to, one, build out the railway, and two, work as sort of colonial officials. And so Indians in Uganda sort of became colonial overseers in Uganda.
I do know that the caste system was utilized in the opposite sense as well, in that the lower rungs of that system often left to go pursue economic mobility in other parts of the empire where that would have been impossible in India. So they went to like Mauritius and East Africa and the Caribbean, when in India they were seen as like the untouchables. So those were the labor force that were used by the British, whereas maybe the higher rungs were the administrators.
Makes sense to me. And this was certainly the view in post-colonial Uganda. South Asians were persecuted under Idi Amin and were sort of forced out of the country and started coming back and reclaiming previous property after Amin was deposed in 1979. And now Indians in Uganda are around 1% of the population, but the tax revenue in Uganda is around 65% from Indians in Uganda, or people of Indian descent. So a wealthy sort of minority group within Uganda. His family moved to Cape Town when Mamdani was young, and then to New York when he was 7. He went to school in New York, went to Kingsbridge Heights School, where he founded the school's cricket team, which Mamdani credits as a very important experience. His bio on the New York Assembly website says, "This act, though not ostensibly a political one, taught him how coming together with a few like-minded individuals can transform rhetoric into reality."
Well, I think sports can really bring people together. When I drove buses at my university, I did note that occasionally a cricket team would get on board, and it was, it was kind of beautiful. It was the former British Empire students all getting along, students from Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, as well as Australia and South Africa.
Cricket is remarkably good at bringing people together for how boring of a sport it is. But I agree, and I wanted to drop that in because I know that is a view that we share on the importance of sport for bringing people together. So Mamdani then went on to study at Bowdoin College in Maine, where he got a degree in Africana Studies, and he founded a chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine. Not long after that, in 2018, he became an American citizen, aged 27, and then after university, he went on to work as a foreclosure prevention housing counselor. So he helped low-income homeowners of color across Queens fight off eviction and stay in their homes. He says that it was this experience negotiating with banks to protect real people that inspired him to ultimately run for office.
So he doesn't have a higher degree above bachelor's degree?
No, he has just a bachelor's
from some
degree.
college in Maine. So what are we doing, Adam?
Yeah, I know. On the basis of Zohran's sort of early life,
wait, when does Young Cardamom come into this? Is this around this time?
This is around this time. While he was at university, he did have a music career as Young Cardamom. He had a song called Nani, which he was sort of named for his grandmother. I actually did not focus on his career as Young Cardamom. I should have mentioned it a little bit more. He released an EP in 2016 called Sida Mukyalo, No Going Back to the Village. His first song was called Kanda, which was about chapati. He did this in collaboration with his best friend, who is a Ugandan rapper called Abdul Bah Hussein, and then released songs in 2017 and 2019.
I do think that this background, while it does seem sort of irrelevant, is not for New York City, because the expression of the oppressed, at least since, the 70s, even 60s, 50s, when it was jazz before then, and evolved into rap music, like where rap music as we know it pretty much was invented was New York City, and it was to describe the struggle of living in the capital of capital, but being so poor, right? And so I think even though he was sort of a Nepo baby doing this rap career that didn't go anywhere, like it did still connect him to those roots in New York City, right? And the expression that people have that live in New York City, especially in the areas he represented as a state assembly member.
Yeah, so this sort of ties together a few points that I wanted to ask you about the last sort of questions at this point. Zohran is a first generation immigrant in New York City, which is arguably the most sort of immigrant dense city in the world. There's perhaps a few cities that would claim that, but I think New York's going to be high on any of those lists. And he's an immigrant from a privileged background, self-admitted privileged background. And of course he has like musical connection as well. So how do you think these all come together to benefit his sort of, or perhaps detract from his campaign, his popularity, him as a sort of cultural idea, cultural icon?
Well, I had this thought that his parents must be very proud, not just for the obvious reasons, but I believe I sent you the foreword of his dad's book on the Rwandan genocide.
Yeah.
Which he wrote when Zohran was like 8 years old. And in it, he mentions that he hopes Zohran will read it one day for his own benefit, but obviously not then because he was 8. And it does seem like Zohran has taken the words of his dad, who is this scholar on post-colonial studies and justice. His dad did march in the civil rights movement when he was an exchange student in America as well. And it does seem like he's taken the torch and the foundation that his dad has built with all of this academia on the subject and put it into practice. So that part of it invented Zohran, right? Having a dad that was so knowledgeable in these topics. So it really lended to creating this person that is so well versed in his theory, but also willing to walk the walk as well. In terms of being an immigrant, I think, yeah, that really benefits to running in New York City in places like Queens, Brooklyn, but also detracts, right? He lost Staten Island. People in Manhattan, a lot of them obviously wary, even though there's a lot of immigrants to Manhattan, just very wealthy ones.
Well, I think that you hit the nail on the head, really. I think he's in many ways a sort of platonic ideal of New York, right? Like he's an immigrant background, he's very creative, he's clearly very intelligent, very charismatic, but he's also wealthy. And whilst as much as people would like to believe that New York is the place where you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that's not necessarily the case. And I think coming from a privileged background does help to bridge some divides, right? Like he's both an immigrant but shielded from some of the downsides of that by coming from a relatively privileged position. Not all of them, I'm sure, but some, I think. What is it that the Statue of Liberty says?
Bring me your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free, something like that.
Yeah, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. And so New York does self-consciously style itself as for immigrants and for perhaps a poor and downtrodden immigrant class. But then again, it is the capital of capital, right? It's the most financially important city in the world.
I think when you kind of take Manhattan out of the equation, which you still have this in some like legacy neighborhoods that have a lot of rent control, but in the other boroughs, certainly, even if you are rich, you are still going to interact with poor people every day, right? It's kind of the case with most big cities, though I would say if you live in like Kensington in London, you can kind of avoid the pores, right?
To a degree,
but
sure.
In New York, like, let's say you're from Flushing, Queens, or like Flatbush in Brooklyn, if you get rich, you'll probably just move to a different building in the same neighborhood, right? So like a nicer nicer building. So there are rich and poor interacting in most parts of New York City. Again, I left out Manhattan because that has kind of become a playground of the rich. But I think on the campaign, when they asked why he still takes the subway everywhere, he said because if you're in a car with tinted windows, the only New Yorker you'll see is yourself in your reflection. So I think as a person from that city, as a person working for that city, he would still interact with both rich and poor every day.
Yeah, I think that has helped him out, been part of his very effective strategy. But we're not at the mayoral campaign yet. After Mamdani worked as a housing foreclosure prevention counselor, he stood in the New York Assembly elections. New York Assembly is the lower house of the New York State Legislature. That was in 2019. He won the Democratic primary over five-term incumbent Arvela Simotas. That primary took over a month to call. It's very close. Yeah. He won the actual election in November of 2020 with no Republican opposition and was re-elected without opposition in 2022 and in 2024. He is part of the Democratic Socialists of America bloc and was the primary sponsor of 20 bills, 3 of which became law. We've spoken about the Democratic Socialists of America before, but do you want to give us a brief sort of explanation of what they're all about, Sam?
Yeah, they kind of range depending on what city you're in. But from what I understand, they're not necessarily a political party, more of an organization that range anywhere from those people with a table and a self-made newspaper all the way up to sponsoring political candidates for certain elections. Some of their chapters have more teeth than others. I think evidenced by Mamdani, the New York chapter is very serious about their involvement in the city's politics and the national politics. Other cities, there's not enough support to be anything other than basically like a Gramsci book club, essentially,
right.
Which is kind of the case with San Diego. But I do hear that one is growing.
Sure.
And I think their numbers are growing a lot in the last month due to Zohran himself.
Well, that's very promising to hear. One of the interesting bills that Mamdani proposed that didn't become law, which was, I think, something that was used quite heavily against him in the mayoral campaign trail, was a bill about preventing the use of public money for investing in Israel, the Not in Our Name bill. But I think that shows that he has a sort of consistent, principled approach to his politics, right? It goes back to his student days and organizing for Palestine. Yeah. The bills that did pass were fairly minor of the 3 that passed. He was co-sponsor on a number of bills. This is just of the bills that he was the primary sponsor on. 2 of them were about allowing people to become sort of more engaged with local politics. One of them was about people being able to submit questions directly to officials for public hearings so that they would know what questions were going to be asked of those officials at these public hearings. And another one was about reducing the number of signatures required for public hearings from 500 to 125 so that it was easier to question officials there. The one that I think is interesting of the 3 is the third one, which was a law which amended another law about how you could sell alcohol within a certain distance from schools. And it was basically so that people could buy alcoholic drinks at Astoria's Museum of the Moving Image, which had previously been banned under this law. This stood out to me because it seems to be like a pretty solid example of local politics. It's a very super specific, super local issue. There's a local museum. It's pretty cool. It'd be cooler if you could get a beer there. Here, let's fix that. It's an easy win. What do you think about that? Do you agree that that's like a pretty solid example of local politics, or do you think it's a detractor from his credentials?
Well, let me just point to this as another example for the people saying he wants to impose Sharia law. Yeah, I think that is a very good example of local politics. And I think that's his appeal, is that what he promises and what he has a track record of doing is addressing very specific issues in pragmatic ways.
Yeah, and I think that's something that mayors are well positioned to do, probably more so than national politicians, because when you're talking about national strategy, it can all be a bit ephemeral, especially if it's in a big country like the United States, right? Like if you are in New York, what's your opinion on agricultural policy in rural Iowa going to be, right? You're not going to really even know how to think about it necessarily, but if you are in New York, you can see that, the roads need fixing and the rent's too high, etc. Something else that he did as the assemblyman was to spearhead a trial of free buses. Lasted a year, gathered some useful data on, wanted to make it permanent. That didn't pass, but is intending to roll that out as mayor. The other noteworthy thing from his time as an assemblyman was his hunger strike, which he did in solidarity with taxi drivers in New York. Do you remember this happening at the time? I must say that I don't.
I do not. And I didn't really understand when, sorry for jumping ahead to the campaign again, but during the debates when he talked about relieving like $1 billion of debt from cab drivers, I didn't know what he meant by that. So I did some research into what this was. And correct me on any point of the story. From what I understand, cab drivers needed like a specific token to show that they were approved by the city to drive taxis, and
that's called a medallion.
Medallion.
It's like a license, basically. Yeah.
The city limited the number that they issued, so these became very, very valuable to the point where if you wanted to be a taxi driver, by like 2012, they were about $1 million, and you had to take out loans to pay for one of these from one of the people that were retiring.
Yeah. And part of that is that they were getting bought up by investment
funds.
Of course
they were.
And so that drove the price up. It is worth noting that by 2020, the price had fallen to like $180,000 from the high of $1 million in, I think, 2013.
Well, that was because of Uber, right? So that was the reason why they were in this debt, and why people like Mamdani saw it as something that the city needed to step in on. Before, it was kind of seen as, okay, they have this debt. Yeah, it's crazy prices, but they can sell it when they're done. That's sort of a nest egg for their retirement, that sort of thing. But then along comes Uber, along comes Lyft. They have no regulations within the city. The city is not willing to regulate them to that extent, so the price of the medallions plummets. So then you have people left with $1 million debt with no promise of getting out of it. Just to drive a cab, right? This is not a PhD they're taking a loan out for or something, or a house.
Part of the allegation from the taxi drivers was that the city had sold these as rock solid investments, right? They're like, this is better than stocks, this is better than bonds, etc. And of course, Uber and Lyft crashed that. So in 2021, the average medallion debt that a New York City taxi driver held was $600,000.
Crazy.
And monthly payments could be up to $4,000.
Wow.
So there was a 15-day hunger strike outside of the New York State Legislature, which Mamdani participated
Was
in.
it state legislature or city hall?
Sorry, it was City Hall. You're absolutely right. City Hall in New York. And so for those 15 days, Mamdani had only water and Gatorade, and eventually, after a few days, chicken broth as well. But he did not eat any solids that whole time. Quote from him in The Guardian in 2021, before anyone had heard of him, I have for you here.
I woke up on Monday of this week, and I wasn't sure if I could go on. It had been 12 days at that point, and I wasn't sure where we were and how long it was going to go. I was just so tired, and I was so tired of being hungry.
But he did stuck it out for the whole stretch. He broke his fast with 2 slices of avocado and a date.
I'm sure his haters, like Andrew Cuomo, would say he was cheating because he'd been training his whole life during Ramadan.
I'm sure he would. So I wanted to ask, this kind of social proof, obviously it's very strong social proof, shows that he is committed to the cause. Do you think that something this extreme is necessary? And what do you think about it being with taxi drivers specifically in a New York context?
Well, the taxi driver specifically makes it very New York centric, in that when you think of New York and you just like close your eyes, picture New York things, like a yellow cab might be one of the first things to pop up.
Exactly. And that's internationally true.
And is it necessary for what? I'll ask.
Necessary to demonstrate that he's serious about the job and his policies,
his principles,
and his campaign promises, his principles.
I would say yes. I would say yes in that in American politics, and I'm pretty sure this is the case with most Western nations as well, the next generation of politicians usually start as like the staffers and the aides of the current politicians that got an internship and connections or connections through finance or these other industries, and they just kind of appear out of nowhere and are sponsored by the parties that they're going to represent. And what I've noticed with particularly people that have been affiliated with like socialist movements in the US recently, Mamdani, there's a congressman named Greg Casar, who's also Mamdani's age, who's from Texas. He started as a union rep for, it was either auto workers or farm workers in San Antonio, but where he was doing strikes as well, like hunger strikes for the union. And it seems in order to break through the traditional liberal political establishment, if you want people to take your leftism seriously within that context, you need to show proof of your actions. This is even true with Bernie Sanders, who is not as accepted in that community anymore as someone like Zohran. But Bernie, his big thing people would point to is that he marched with Martin Luther King Jr., right? There always needs to be proof to action for socialists and leftists. Like, there's so much skepticism of that side, and there's been so many bad actors as well around the world that I think if you are going to portray yourself as a socialist politician, you need to have the resume to show that you care for the workers, or even the workers themselves will be skeptical of you.
Yeah, like Jeremy Corbyn getting arrested at anti-apartheid protests in the 1980s.
Yeah, they all have like a resume. They all have something they can point to. They've all been hit by. Yours will be the Dutch police, right?
Well, maybe. I'm also going to a protest tomorrow, so we'll see. Maybe that one will get rowdy.
Hey, report back.
I will. It's well, we'll get onto it another time. But so along comes the 2025 mayoral election in New York,
which at first was Adams, right? At first, it was going to be the incumbent.
It was going to be against Eric Adams, and this fell apart because of a. Oh, I'm going to get the musician wrong. I believe a Sabrina Carpenter music video.
Yes.
Yes. So Sabrina Carpenter filmed a music video in a church in New York, and then some like religious watch group was like, why was this pop star allowed to film in this church?
Like a quite sacrilegious video.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that led to an internal investigation from the church, which found that they'd basically been like paying off or like receiving lots of money from bad actors and paying Eric Adams money, and that led to a scandal where Eric Adams then wasn't going to run again. But it basically was like the craziest domino effect where Sabrina Carpenter makes a music video and then Eric Adams, this is the scandal that finally breaks him of all the scandals it could have been.
I was about to say, this man is known for a lot of goofy scandals, including like bribes from Turkey.
Yeah. He was like... He received bribes from he was considered a government asset of the Turkish government. He's also just a very like weird and funny guy. Like I strongly recommend the If Books Could Kill episode dedicated to Eric Adams. It might be in their Patreon feed, but he had this proclivity to say that New York was the insert city here of America. Like he would say, he'd go to Zagreb and say, New York is the Zagreb of America. New York is the Bangkok of America. New York is the Istanbul of America. He just do this over and over again.
He was never he's currently in Israel right now. That's why he hasn't met with Mamdani yet. He's always everywhere but New York.
Yeah, he also lives in New Jersey and claimed that his official residence was actually his girlfriend's place, but he definitely lived in New Jersey as the mayor of New York.
The only thing I remember him being in the city for is perp walking Luigi Mangione.
Yes, yeah. Which had the effect of just making Luigi Mangione look real badass.
Yeah, but also so many people hate Eric Adams that like, well, if he feels this way about this guy, then he might be innocent.
Yeah. That is true. That's Eric Adams was an extraordinarily unpopular mayor for New York.
Yeah.
But Andrew Cuomo, who then became the sort of Democratic frontrunner, the establishment Democrat, had a long history in New York, but also quite unpopular, right? And Zohran comes up, this upstart, not accepting any money from any big players, reached $8 million from grassroots campaigns, grassroots donations, and then ended accepting of grassroots donations. He really flipped the script, and there are a few things that helped him to succeed. The one that the press talks about a lot, and the one that Cuomo took away from the race was him on social media.
Yeah, even like all the Democrats think that. They think, oh, he did this so we can run our neoliberal guy with no personality with the same social media team and we'll get the same results. And then it falls flat every time.
Why do you think he was successful on social media?
Because he's a real guy with an agenda and a good personality. So social media just boosts what he is. If you throw Andrew Cuomo into those ads, you're going to go, ick, because he's a gross guy.
Yeah. Cuomo's AI ad about Mamdani was super, super gross.
Yeah.
If you don't remember this, it was an AI ad that showed someone like shoplifting in a kefir saying, thanks, Zohran Mamdani, and someone dressed as a pimp saying, thanks, Zohran Mamdani, because of his various policies that were being misrepresented. But I also think that perhaps the role of social media has been overstated in Mamdani's success. Something that Mamdani did right from the start was to focus on door-knocking campaigns, whereas traditionally politicians, but especially Democrats, would only focus on door-knocking in sort of the final stages of a campaign, and they'd focus on big, expensive TV ads before then. But Mamdani was very effective in getting people door knocking from the beginning, and part of that was how he worked with the door knockers. Right? He would give them this card, or his campaign would give them this card that was like an MTA card. The MTA being the public transit authority in New York, and it would be a stamp card. And once you got like 8 stamps, you would get a poster or a T-shirt or something like that. And that's where the sort of hot girls for Mamdani thing started, was these T-shirts you'd get for door knocking as a result of filling up a stamp card.
So those were official campaign merch.
Those were official campaign, or at least they were distributed by people campaigning on behalf of Mamdani. I don't know if he personally endorsed them, but they were a part of official or semi-official campaigns for him. But then again, he also knew his audience, right? Like, he appeared on the subway interviews.
Well, I was about to say, I think the thing he did utilize about social media was he appeared on pretty much every person, like any person based in New York under 30 with over 100,000 followers. He would just, even if it was very briefly on a TikTok, he was everywhere. And
yeah,
that's where I think he did left no stone unturned when it came to social media. There were things from like, there's a creator who does outfit checks on nights out. So he went and he would just play along with their thing. He wasn't there to just endorse, vote for me, I'm Zohran. He went on, there's a guy who, he puts headphones on strangers. It says like, oh, do you know this topic or genre? Like, name the artist. And he went on and named his favorite like New York rappers or New York artists. And he was able to name like 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 7. And he went on that outfit show, like I said, and he knew all the lingo that would go with these shows.
Absolutely. And I think that paired with his real life presence, both in terms of door knocking, but also in terms of the sort of social proof at showing up at New York events. Like the weekend of Halloween before the election, he turned up at like half a dozen different parties in New York and just made an appearance on stage, right?
Case number 2 for his Sharia law is, I did see a meme where it said, Zohran will impose Sharia law. And it's like, meanwhile, Zohran at the gay club at 1 a.m. And I think he chose those very selectively, which clubs he went to, because they were very representative of different communities within New York City. There was like the hip one near Bushwick or Williamsburg that all the wealthier white and other like young people. Then he went to like a jazz club, and he went to like a gay bar as well. That some of them were quite far out. Like if you look at the map of the ones he hit on one night, he went all over the city.
And this, I think, plays into the other part, this element of the strategy that was very effective, that built him up to be an authentic guy, is the feeling of joy that sort of pervaded all of it. He was like, guys, I'm running to be a good mayor to make life better. Let's have some fun while we do it.
Well, I think he went to a club called Poppy Juice. That was like the gay club. I think it was a Latin gay club. And he said, I want to thank Poppy Juice because in a city where there's so much struggle, it's important to have places that are built for joy.
Yeah.
which I thought was a great line.
Yeah, I think that really helped his campaign.
Side note, did you see FD Signifier's video on Mamdani?
No.
He talked about why Zohran works for black people but Bernie doesn't. And it was about meeting them where they're at, not just getting influencers that are black to endorse him. Like, he, pretty early on in the primaries, he went to a huge church that I think Al Sharpton goes to, who Sharpton did not endorse Mamdani, but he was there in the audience, and he quoted Sharpton back at him, but talked about his time. That's when I heard the story about his dad marching in the civil rights for the U.S. and how his dad got arrested as an exchange student. It was to stand arm in arm with people fighting for liberation within America in the 60s. But he told that story at one of the biggest gospel churches in New York City. So he was meeting them where he's at. And he's a Muslim guy, by the way, right? Like, he went to synagogues, he went to mosques, he went to churches, he went to nightclubs, right? He met people where they're at.
I think that really helped out, meeting people where they're at. He met people with disabilities on their own terms. He went a big soccer tournament on Coney Island. He's an Arsenal fan like yourself.
Yeah.
He met his wife on Hinge. I think that makes him very relatable to a younger crowd.
He went to but he went from all the young people stuff to, I saw him doing a sip and paint at an elderly home. It was like a black elderly home, but then the next morning he was doing Tai Chi at a community center with the old Chinese ladies.
Yeah. But on top of all of that, he was very clear on his policies and very clear on his messaging. And I think, I wrote some of these down, but I think people generally can pull out what Mamdani's main policies were, right? Rent freeze.
Yeah.
Rent won't go up in rent-stabilized apartments. I wasn't sure looking into this why rent was going up in rent-stabilized apartments anyway, but it turns out if you did some renovations, you could raise the rent, but what counted as renovation was very loosey-goosey. Public groceries, he wants to have trials of city-run grocery stores, keeping groceries high quality and cheap. Free public buses, of course, offering free childcare in the form of vouchers. He wants to pay for it by raising taxes on the very richest New Yorkers, and was clear constantly and hammering home that unless you earn over $1 million a year, this won't affect you.
And that corporate tax would go up to the rate of New Jersey, right?
Exactly. And he wanted to raise the minimum wage in New York to $30 an hour by 2030.
Another line he said, for too long, the millionaires have told you making $30 an hour that your enemy is the person to your right making $20 an hour. That's a very socialist bar.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He was on message. And even in how he responded to his detractors, he was on message. One of the most famous moments, I think, of his campaign was when he was responding to Andrew Cuomo in a debate. Mamdani was sometimes criticized by Andrew Cuomo for his lack of experience. He'd worked as an assemblyman, but really that's it. And Mamdani said, look, the problem with your experience is that we are familiar with it. To Mr. Cuomo, I have never had to resign in disgrace. I've never cut Medicaid. I have never stolen hundreds of millions of dollars from the MTA. I have never hounded the 13 women who credibly accused me of sexual harassment. I've never sued for their gynecological records. And I have never done those things because I am not you, Mr. Cuomo. And furthermore, it is Mamdani. And correcting his pronunciation at the end was a baller way to end that little tirade.
And I think Cuomo saying that he's never had a real job, his last name's Cuomo. His dad was also, mayor of the city, right?
Yeah.
And he got governor of the state, I believe. Takes it back to, his first job was, a government job given by his dad when he was, 25. So his critique was very unfounded as well.
Yeah. So we're going to have to wrap up shortly because you've got a meeting to rush off to. But I want to say, of these, which do you think is the most important? Which do you think is the most effective? Is it the authenticity? Is it the savvy use of social media? Is it having clearly communicated progressive policies? Is it even possible to delineate?
I think it's the policies for sure, but you need a messenger that will carry those well. You can have great policies in the hands of a dead fish, and they'll lose an election because they're not charismatic. But I think the policies are what deflect against the critique. And I think policies are ultimately why actually Donald Trump won. The problems he was addressing were made up or exacerbated, though he would offer policy solutions to those things. Right? I'm going to deport 10 million people, and he's currently trying to deport 10 million people. It's a horrifying policy, but everyone knew that was his policy. And when you look at the Democrats in America, or you look at Labour in the UK, like, what does Keir Starmer stand for? We ask it every other week.
It's so hard to know.
Yeah, there's no policy. There's no agenda. But with Mamdani, that was the point he wanted to get home to his supporters. Like, he had them repeat it back to him at rallies. Like, we're going to make the buses, and they'd, like, shout, free and fast, you know? Like, which I've never seen it pushed to that extent, where they became a rallying cry.
Yeah, it's hard to get people to rally around buses. Buses are very effective, but they're not particularly popular forms of public transportation.
Yeah, but I think the policies are what drove him to victory. I mean, without it, he is a charismatic guy. He is savvy on social media, but I think then only the critiques would be amplified.
Yeah.
Because if you can counter the critique with actual messaging, actual policy, then I think you stand a good chance. I think the reason it's so important is because that counters the rise of right-wing populism, which is so fear-mongering, so abstract, right? There's a boogeyman out there that's going to kill you, right? And he fits the mold of their boogeyman. You know, he's self-described socialist, which they don't know what that is. He is a Muslim. He's brown. He's born in Africa. Like, he fits the mold of their boogeyman, but the messaging was so clear. And to be fair, there's not a lot of, like, real Republicans in New York City, but he was still able to break through to, like, the moderate Democrats, because even though there was so much fear-mongering around him, the policies came through, the messaging came through.
It's true, and some of the responses to Mamdani from the right were some of the most blatantly racist things I've seen. Like, it was literally just, he's a Muslim.
Yeah. I mean, I heard this a lot. I heard, how would New York City come across if a Muslim was leading us through the 25th anniversary of 9/11? And I'm like, that sounds like a city that has healed and moved on properly. Yeah. Right?
It's also very interesting because one of the books his father wrote was about exactly this: Muslims in post 9/11 America. Good Muslim, bad Muslim.
Wow.
But I absolutely think policies have got to lead there, and I think Mamdani's doing a fantastic job. I have a few little things here about where we're going next, but I'm just going to run through them quickly because I know you have to be off.
Sure.
So I want to say that Mamdani has appointed Lina Khan as the co-chair of his transition team. Lina Khan was the head of the Federal Trade Commission under Joe Biden and was known for taking big swings at big corporate players. She blocked a huge supermarket merger. She returned $60 million in unpaid tips to workers from Amazon, and Meta and Amazon tried to have her recused because of how she was taking on big tech.
She's the only good thing from Biden's administration.
Yeah. 50,000 people have applied to work for Mamdani in his government so far. And we are seeing others being inspired by Mamdani. The one whom I'm most familiar with, who is pretty obviously inspired by taking inspiration from Mamdani, is Zach Polanski, leader of the Green Party in the UK. But I know there are others throughout the US and throughout the world as well. We look forward to seeing how this will play out when Mamdani actually takes office in the next year.
Yeah, I think we'll pencil in a check-in in maybe like May, June, to see how he's doing.
First 100 days, we'll do that.
Oh, that actually sounds like a good idea.
Cool. Yeah. Any final thoughts before I wrap this up?
I'll just say that his spark, being a self-described democratic socialist, and the courage he cites as being able to call himself that, because he was one, right? Like, we know that from his studies and, you know, his dad, and his middle name's Kwame, right? But where he said he got the courage to call himself that was when he canvassed for Bernie Sanders in 2015, 2016. And that was around the time, like, I got inspired down this path. I think you were in the UK, like, Corbyn was like a similar inspiration. I think to see such tangible results come out of the spark that was Bernie gives me a lot of hope, because there will hopefully be many more to come that were there at that time and place. And now it will create even more that were probably sparked in this last year from Mamdani himself. So it does give me hope. We have had episodes where we really end on sour notes, but whether he's able to do what he sets out to do in office, I don't think that will be from lack of trying on his part. I think he will try his best, and it will just be, if he is blocked at every step, we will see, but he does have the will of the people at the moment, so I am hopeful that at least this will inspire others within America and around the world.
Me too.
I mean, 70% young men voting for him is a good sign, right?
Absolutely. And I think it shows that, they're not all as red-pilled as you might think if you were to listen to the media.
Well, red pill, but with a hammer and sickle. Who knows?
Yeah.
That's what we are, right?
Exactly. The good kind.
Slightly darker shade of red.
Yeah. Hi everyone, Adam here with an update. Since we recorded this, Trump and Mamdani, the mayor-elect, have had their first meeting on the 21st of November in the White House. In some ways, it was strange. Trump really seemed to like Mamdani, but I actually think it makes sense. Trump is many things, and perhaps the most flattering of those things is that he's a showman. He likes theatrics. On his podcast, Blind Boy made the argument that the single greatest force in American politics is wrestling. In the WWE, which Trump has famously starred in, everyone knows that the fight's a stage. Everyone knows that it's theatre. But, more so than other forms of theatre, you're expected to suspend that disbelief within wrestling. And since everyone knows that it's all a show, this means that the villains aren't really villains. It's an act with a wink at the camera. Insofar as there is any consistency to Trump as an entity, disregarding for a moment the politics around him and the people who are holding him in that position, it's this. It's that Trump has constructed himself to be a spectacle. He loves the limelight. He loves the attention. He loves the showmanship. And Mamdani is a spectacular showman. He has real charisma, perhaps more than any politician since JFK. You can see it in the way that he acts on camera. You can see it in his aura farming, except that it's not really aura farming and it's not really kayfabe, because Mamdani, at least for now, comes with receipts. Trump recognizes that charisma. Trump has some considerable charisma himself. It's game recognized game. And not only that, Trump recognizes winners and likes to surround himself with them. And Mamdani is clearly onto a winner. Trump is attracted to charisma and he's attracted to power. And the other thing that Trump is attracted to is New York City. In whatever remnants of a soul still lie in Trump's shriveled heart, there is still a love for New York. Ultimately, he's a New York real estate guy. He can't detach himself from that city. And in that city, Mamdani is top dog. Trump is from New York, and he and his father always wanted to be a part of the sort of elite society within New York, but they were never welcomed by them. They were rich, but they were tacky. They were slumlords, really. And this wasn't the vibe that the New York elite wanted. Trump resents being rejected by them, and it's something he never really got over, even now that he is the president of the United States. And in New York, Mamdani is a big deal, and Trump craves his approval, just as he craved the approval of those elites. There were a few standout moments from their shared press conference. Part of what was impressive about it was how Mamdani continued to stay on message. At one point, a journalist asked Mamdani whether he took inspiration from Trump's campaign. And Mamdani didn't even really mention the campaign. He started talking about the cost of living crisis. And it's only through watching it again that I realized that Mamdani had framed it such that he and Trump had both campaigned on this. And that was true. They did. Trump's solution and Mamdani's solution are pretty radically different. But Mamdani took this one singular point of union, so it's basically not to annoy President Trump, to try and stay in his good books. He is the president after all, and that is important for a US politician trying to get things done. And he just spoke about the things on his agenda. He just spoke about the things that were important to his victory, important to his campaign, and hopefully important to his time as the mayor.
One of the other standout moments was when a journalist asked Mamdani if he stood by calling Trump a fascist. And Mamdani started out with an answer, and it looked like it was going to be a fairly well-prepared one, fairly polished. And Trump interrupted him and said, "It's okay. You can say it. I don't mind." And it sort of came across like Trump couldn't be bothered to deal with the answer to that. He's used to being called a fascist. He's used to being called a racist. I don't know whether it's accurate to say that Trump doesn't know what a fascist means. I suspect he probably does. I just think he doesn't care. And that's concerning in itself, right? This is supposedly the leader of the free world who doesn't mind being called a fascist. Perhaps you could call it kayfabe, a wink at the camera to suggest that it isn't really real, but as established, Trump uses kayfabe to justify his own villainy, to pretend that it's not really villainy at all. I would like to stress that I don't necessarily think Trump is aware that he is doing this. I don't think he has that kind of intelligence. I just think it's how he's learnt to conduct business. It's his own form of showmanship, a kind of unconscious proficiency. At other points in the interview, Trump talked about how he liked Mamdani and that he knew liberals would like Mamdani because they already do. But he also talked about how he thought that some conservatives would like Mamdani. And this too is Trump. I think that he's clearly quite often influenced by the last charismatic person that he spoke to, hence a lot of his flip-flopping around Ukraine and Russia. But it also seems to come from Trump's sort of innate need to be liked, and it seems like he's trying to piggyback off some of the momentum that Mamdani has, trying to steal some of Mamdani's limelight, which is kind of a crazy turn of events for the President of the United States talking to the mayor of New York. And it seems like Mamdani did have a lasting influence on Trump, at least perhaps a short-winded one. A few days later, Trump appeared out in public dressed very stylishly, more stylishly than Trump's ever been seen to be dressed, in a black greatcoat and a red scarf tucked into it, a style that was reminiscent of a certain Zohran Mamdani. So this was a press conference that they did together. Mamdani did a good job of staying on message. Trump really seemed to like Mamdani, seemed to enjoy being in his presence, seemed to enjoy his charisma and his showmanship. Most of those I've spoken to on the left seem to agree that this was a big victory for Mamdani. He managed to keep his integrity, lacked the sycophancy that we've seen from other leaders on the supposed left. Keir Starmer comes to mind, although I think he's abandoned the title of left long ago. But Mamdani seemed to manage to be true to his message whilst ingratiating himself, at least on the surface level, to the president. And that is something that's very impressive. Conservatives also seem to think that this was a victory for Donald Trump, in the sense that they seem to think he's playing some sort of grand 5D chess game. Andrew Colvert, who was an editor on the Charlie Kirk Show, appeared on Fox News to argue that Trump, by being cordial to Mamdani, gets to put his hands up and wait for Mamdani's policies to fail, which they seem certain that they will, and then say, look, I did the right thing, let him try, and he failed anyway. That wasn't my read on the situation, not least because I think his ideas are very good and will work splendidly. But there's nothing that's stopped the American right-wing press from labeling any left-wing successes as somehow not being that. We look forward to seeing how Mamdani will do in the future, and I'll let you get back to the end of the original episode. Thanks so much.
As we end, I do want to give a shout out to an Independence Day. We're recording this on the 14th of November. Tomorrow, the 15th of November, is Palestinian Independence Day. Palestinian independence was declared in 1988 by Yasser Arafat. The declaration was written by Mahmoud Darwish, who is a poet, and was adopted by the Palestinian National Convention, which was the governing body of the PLO, leading the way for the recognition of a Palestinian state within the United Nations and the wider world. Congratulations.
And if I'm not mistaken, it was also the Independence Day on our pilot episode that may or may not have aired.
Yes,
So
yes, it was.
we have been at this for a year.
Oh yeah,
Here's to many more.
That's true. Good luck to our comrades in Palestine. We are thinking of you.
We will always mark that day for sure.
Yeah. And Sam, I have here a quote from Zohran Mamdani's victory speech to round us off.
Tonight we have spoken in a clear voice. Hope is alive. Hope is a decision that tens of thousands of New Yorkers made day after day, volunteer shift after volunteer shift. Despite attack ad after attack ad, more than 1 million of us stood in our churches, in gymnasiums, in community centers, as we filled the ledger of democracy. And while we cast our ballots alone, we chose hope together. Hope over tyranny. Hope over big money and small ideas. Hope over despair. We won because New Yorkers allowed themselves to hope that the impossible could be made possible. We won because we insisted that no longer would politics be something that is done to us. Now it is something that we do. Standing before you, I think of the words of Jawaharlal Nehru. A moment comes, but rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends, and when the soul of a nation, long suppressed, finds utterance. Tonight we have stepped out from the old into the new.
Sam, thank you for potting with me. Thank you for listening. Look after each other and keep fighting the good fight.